Hello, and welcome back to another episode of History Talk. Today, we will be venturing to 1940 southern United States to speak about communal relations, specifically seen in a novel, A Lesson Before Dying. As always, I am your host, Ronald, and joining me today, we have two experts on communal relations from this era, Billy and Jimbo. Great to have you guys here on the show.
Hey, Ron.
Hey, Ronnie. How we doing?
Good. So these guys here are experts on communal relations. That means, well, I'll hand it off to you guys.
All right, Ron. Communal relations is the relationships or interactions between people in a community. Today, our talk will be focusing on the communal relations in a novel, A Lesson Before Dying. We will take an in-depth look at the interactions of specifically Jefferson and Grant Wiggins with the white people in their small southern town of Bayonne, Louisiana in the late 1940s.
In the novel, A Lesson Before Dying, communal relations are a key part of this plot. The relationship between black and white people throughout the story is often hostile. This relationship ultimately led to Jefferson, who was an innocent man, being sentenced to death for a murder that he did not commit.
Yes, the hostile relationship between black and white people at this time is what drives the plot of the story and creates the main conflicts.
I totally agree, Ron. It is also important to note that these occurrences are not limited to just the main characters, Jefferson and Grant. The black community as a whole was treated very unjustly in Bayonne at this time. This unjust treatment is seen in their living and working conditions. Almost all black people in the town worked on plantations where they were paid very little for very hard jobs. Because of these low wages and long hours, most of them would never go to college and had very little education. It is also important to note the plantation school was very small and lacked proper school supplies compared to the school that most white children attended.
Yes, of course. An article that I recently read talked about this unfair treatment, saying, in much of America in the 1940s, racial segregation was strictly enforced, both by Jim Crow laws and by old age custom. The civil rights movement was still in its infancy. Laws ensuing voting rights and equal access to jobs and public facilities were decades away.
Wow, so clear from this article. The book and countless other sources that communal relationship between black and white people at this time was extremely unfair. We should actually dive into a few examples straight from the book to further explain what we're talking about.
Of course, let's get into it. The first and most obvious example from the book is Jefferson being wrongly accused of murder, being sentenced to death with no evidence that he was actually responsible. Also related to Jefferson, during his trial, Jefferson's own lawyer compared him to a hog, saying, "What justice would there be to take this life? Justice, gentlemen. Why, I would just as soon put a hog on the electric chair as this."
Lastly, while going to Mr. Henry's house, Grant Wiggins had to enter through the back door and wait for hours to talk to
Sheriff Goodry.
While he and his family socialized and ate dinner.
Those are some key examples to show listeners the unjust treatment of black people during this time period. I would also like to bring up the fact that even to this day, some black people are still discriminated against in America. In an article written by Brett Milano, he says, half a century after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, more than half of black Americans still experience some form of racial bias, with systemic effects ranging from unequal prison terms to premature death, according to a new poll from Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Brett then goes on to elaborate on some events, and it is still shocking what is going on to this day. Looks like we got a caller on the line. Hello, caller. Welcome to History Talk.
Hey, Ron. Honored to be on the show. I've actually got an interesting statistic from a Newsweek article. It says slavery in America didn't end with the Civil War. Between 1865 and 1941, millions of African Americans were forced to work with little or no pay, and many were held against their will, according to Wall Street Journal Atlanta Bureau Chief Douglas A. Blackman.
Wow, that is a great addition to this in-depth talk. Thank you for calling. Anyways, thanks for having you guys here on the show. Billy, Jimbo, caller.
Thanks,
As
Ron.
always.
Thanks for having me, Ron.
As always, I'm your host, Ronald, signing out.